welcome to the Sports Night interview. I am your host, Evan Grote, and today we're joined by our guest, Nick Cosmider, who is a staff writer for The Athletic. And Nick has a really good piece out on The Athletic right now that I encourage you to go out there and read. It's all about the landscape of college football and how the boom in the transfer portal has really transformed how NFL scouts and executives are evaluating players ahead of the NFL draft. And because the draft is only a couple weeks away, we thought this would be a very relevant topic to discuss. So, Nick, we appreciate you giving us a few minutes here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Evan. I appreciate it.
Let's jump into it now. As you point out in the story, it's very different now. The landscape is very different. You have older players who are 22, 23 years old, maybe even 24 in some cases. They've spent 3 or 4 years transferring schools, 3 or 4 different schools throughout their career. And we all understand why that is with NIL. It gives them a chance to make a little bit of extra money that maybe they wouldn't make as a 7th round draft pick. Could you just take us through a little bit what you learned about the process that these scouts are going through and how it's changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we see how much NIL and the open transfer era have completely changed college football, right? And it's even more so in basketball where one or two players can completely change the trajectory of a program. It's like that in football, and it used to be you'd see this a lot with quarterbacks, but now it virtually touches just about every position where you go, you need to beef up your defensive line, you get into the portal and you go shopping for that. But obviously covering the NFL was interested in just what this has looked like now that we have a few years of data, right? Because this all really started in 2021. Guys had the extra COVID year of eligibility. They now had NIL opportunities. They had the free transfer opportunities. And that really started an era where, yeah, guys are staying in school a little bit longer. They're playing for multiple schools. And in part to, yes, chase some NIL money, but also giving them a chance to really kind of check a box about what do I need to show NFL teams? Is there someplace better where I can fit into a scheme that more NFL teams would like to see me in? So that has been the player side of it. From a executive and scouting side, which changed now is, talking to a couple of the general managers for this story was like area scouts they used to know a guy from the time of school was recruiting him as maybe a junior in high school all the way through his college experience. So they got to know very intimately, like the people in that player's life, what makes him tick, all those sorts of things. Now, because guys are moving around so much, those scouting departments, it's kind of like a web that they have to be able to weave together. It's Terry Fontenot said in the piece, like you have to have a lot more collaboration among your scouting departments to make sure that there's no gaps in the information that we're missing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned the area scouts having one of the hardest jobs now because they just don't have a chance to build that long-term profile on these prospects the way they were once able to do. Do you think that's going to really change things, the way NFL teams are approaching this whole draft process? Will we see the possibility of like a transfer analyst be like a new position in NFL scouting departments?
Yeah, I think teams are looking pretty hard at what exactly they need to do to make sure they are on top of that landscape. Like it's always been the job of NFL teams, right? To get ready for those college players when they get here, to have them set up for success. And now the information part of it, which is such a huge part of like drafting and scouting, that's changing a little bit. And I thought Brian Gutekunst, the Packers GM, kind of had an interesting thing to say when he was like, whoever can kind of really think outside the box with this and come up with ways to kind of maximize value is going to succeed in this era. And the Packers have done a pretty darn good job, with really young rosters. I think they made the playoffs a couple of years ago with the youngest roster to ever reach the playoffs. So they've clearly gotten a handle on sort of this new frontier. But I think we're still somewhat early days in terms of just how teams want to fully handle this.
Yeah. And one of the other things you point out in the story is that a prospect who has changed schools 2 or 3 times throughout his college career, it's no longer seen as a red flag. And, as a fan of college athletics, it always irritates me when a player from the team that I'm cheering for leaves, but it's no longer seen as a red flag with scouts. But I want to get your personal opinion. Do you think that shows, is it show that the prospect is able to adapt to new situations, new offenses, new coaching? Or do you think it shows maybe a lack of commitment and just kind of looking to take care of themselves?
I think it varies. I don't necessarily think there is a one size fits all box. I'm out here in Denver. I cover the Broncos, and Bo Nix obviously is an example that I used in this story where here's a guy who always dreamed of going to Auburn. His father went there. That's what he wanted to do. And his first year there in 2019, he was the SEC Freshman of the Year. Kind of looked like he was on a trajectory to kind of be an institution there essentially. And some things happen. There's a lot of coaching changes. There's a couple injuries he dealt with, and ultimately decided that like Auburn wasn't the place for him to kind of finish his development, in the college ranks. And so he transferred really for the idea of, again, finding a little bit of a different scheme fit, finding a culture that he fit into well, and has 2 record-setting years at Oregon, to where he was a guy thought of as a second or third round pick, and ends up going number 12, and has, throws the second most touchdown passes for a rookie in NFL history last year. There was a lot of good that came with it. And for the team, there was so much more information they were able to have around people who had been connected to Bo Nix that helped from the team side. So I do think that you see a lot of these of like, there's not time in the transfer portal a lot of times for these guys to build genuine relationships with the coaches who they are joining. And a lot of times these position coaches who might be recruiting them, they're on their way from year to year. So there's just a lot of fluidity to that, where it's hard to kind of anchor those real relationships. So kids have to decide what is most important for them. But I think it varies. I think there can be a lot of positive situations, but others where it's just like, if you're really just trying to, collect the money, if that's the only lens through which you're viewing the opportunity to transfer, sometimes I think those are the kids that run into some trouble.
What do you think about the idea that now that we're in this era of transfer portal, NIL money, it can really benefit a prospect who doesn't feel the pressure to have to rush and jump in to the NFL draft, or even, college basketball, the NBA draft? Because I know that sometimes, shifting the conversation a little bit to the NBA, you have these guys who are coming out of college after 1 year of basketball. They're 18, 19-year-old kids going to play with grown men. Sometimes they're just not ready. But now the college athlete has the benefit of staying a little bit longer, being able to maybe support their family in some cases, stay and develop. And in the long run, it can help them have a longer pro career. What do you think about that?
I think it's another one where there's like there's pros and cons to that, because I think if you're able to play for, a couple solid programs, get good coaching at multiple programs, learn different schemes, and to your point, kind of like learn how to be a professional, because that's sort of what you have to be now. Learn how to manage your money and have some outside responsibilities beyond the football field. That's all part of being a pro when you get to the NFL. So I think a lot of that is good. And you mentioned, I think the opportunity to take care of your family while you're in school is a huge boon. The other part of it, though, is, in talking to Panthers coach Dave Canales about this, is sometimes the rate at which guys are transferring and the kind of the when they're doing it leads to where they are not in a school or not in a program for a semester at a time, or maybe a summer they're not in a program as they're looking to transfer. And at that stage, as you're trying to physically develop into a pro, missing out on, that amount of time with a real strength coach, or even just not having the same continuity within the same program that you're working out in, that can have some negative effects. So, and then of course the other part of it is careers are finite in terms of the body in the NFL. So if you're choosing to stay until you're 25, perhaps that's great. You're getting developed. And, Broncos case last year, you had Nix, you had Devon Vele, a wide receiver who was 26 years old from Utah when he got in there and had a really strong rookie season. But maybe your career is shorter on the back end because you've already spent so much time in school. So I think it's a give and take that the team, the players and the families have to really kind of figure out.
Yeah, and to what you alluded to there in some of your response, oftentimes in NFL, we hear about culture fit and NFL teams trying to find prospects that fit their system, the culture that they're trying to create. Do you think it's harder now for NFL teams to try to gauge that culture fit when you have a guy who's maybe attended 4 colleges in 4 years?
I think it can be challenging. Some of that, like, again, just being able to sort of piece together the stuff when you're not with your position coaches who tend to know these guys better than anyone, in that they're around in their respective universities. Those relationships might not be as deep as they were based on, the jumping around. But on the flip side, if you can kind of be somebody who succeeds at multiple programs, that fits into multiple locker rooms and has shown that you can be a leader in kind of multiple areas. Now teams can look at that and say, hey, it wasn't just that he was in one perfect situation that worked for him. He went to two different spots, maintained his ability to kind of be a leader and to be a positive force. And you can look at that and say, all right, well then, it's a natural step for him to now take and go into a new situation and be able to thrive there. So I think what I came away with, Evan, like ultimately, there are pros and cons to all this, but I think it's teams' job to make the most out of situations. And I think it wasn't a surprise that some of the coaches you talk to and GMs that look at this as like a positive and view the ways that they can benefit most from it. I think those are the ones that are going to have some success.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. There's definitely benefits and there's drawbacks, but it's not going anywhere, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So Nick Cosmider, everybody from The Athletic, we appreciate your time today, Nick. Go out there and follow his work on The Athletic and keep up all your great work. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks a lot, Evan. Take care.